I've been putting off doing this video, but I fear that I cannot put it off forever, so I'm just going to give it a shot. Up until now, I've been talking to you guys about grabbing the materials for the workshop via GitHub by just downloading them to a zip file or grabbing resources one by one and kind of copying them over to your local version of R. But there is a more efficient and kind of a more elegant way to do this, and I'm going to attempt to show that to you now. So, and this is going to involve another piece of external freeware called Get and a GitHub account, and I'm going to try to walk through the steps that are involved in this whole exercise. But I want to show you the payoff first, and so let's get back to my repositories. And so I've been showing you these repositories and telling you that a good way to get all of these code resources is to hit this download button and drop these into a zip file. But a slightly more elegant way to do this, if you have everything set up properly, would be to clone this repository. And so to clone a repository, you hit this code button and it will give you a URL, and you can copy that URL to a new project in RStudio. So I can go new project, and when I open the new project wizard, I'm going to go to version control, I'm going to go to get, and then I'm going to paste this repository URL in. Okay, I'm not actually going to execute this because I already have this particular project linked to a local directory through Get and GitHub on my computer, so I don't want to override those changes. But this is how you would do it, and you would put this URL in, you would give it a directory name, and this is whatever you want to name the directory on your computer, and you would choose the subdirectory, so wherever you want the directory for this project to live, and then you would create the project, right? And in doing that, it would create the file structure that you need, and it will create the project inside of RStudio that is linked to the GitHub project. And one particularly nice thing about doing it this way is that if I were to make changes to this project, say this evening, in my RStudio version, I have these projects are linked to the GitHub repositories, meaning when I make some changes, I can push those changes up to GitHub, to the cloud, and they'll propagate here in this repository, so that each time that you go in and work on your local version, you can do what's called a pull. So once you've cloned the repository, you'll be working in a different branch of the same project, and if each time you start working in that project you pull, that will pull the most current changes in the project. So you'll always be working, if I'm tweaking code and you're pulling from the GitHub repository, you'll always be working with the most current version of the code that is available. Now in that last section, I talked about the payoff to getting set up with Git and GitHub and working through Git and GitHub with RStudio, but there are a lot of steps and a decent amount of heartburn that's involved in order to get you there. And I'm going to try to walk through those steps as best I can. I will warn you, I am going to outsource a fair amount of this to internet resources that are more articulate on this topic than I am, but let's try to walk through this. So, the first step is to download and install RStudio. That's the real benefit here. I have a separate video talking about RStudio, how to download it, and why you should use it. And so I'm going to defer to that video and skip step 1. Step 2 is download and install Get. So Get is a piece of free version control software, and it can be downloaded and installed, possibly not really easily, but easy enough. And this is where I'm going to outsource some of this to some external sources. So the first one of these, and I will put this in the description for this video, I will put these links in, but there's this NC's training, which has a really nice step-by-step on how to get started downloading, installing, and configuring the Get software to work in your local environment. So there is also a reproducible research workshop from the University of Zurich, which I kind of like their description of how to do this. And then finally, Jenny Bryant, formerly of University of British Columbia. I believe she actually works for RStudio now. She is an R rock star, and she's got an ebook which goes through a lot of the tasks involved with getting configured and setting up Get and a GitHub account to link to your RStudio version. So pick one of these three, or possibly use all three, and try to follow the pretty nice step-by-step instructions that they have to kind of download the Get software. So a quick word of warning, setting up and configuring your Get identity will require a little bit of dexterity with the command line. You can do this in RStudio. You can open a shell in RStudio, or if you're on a Mac and you're comfortable with the terminal, or on a PC if you're comfortable with the command line, you'll have to do some of your Get configurations over here. So for instance, I already have Get installed, the software, so I can do some things like echo the version, and I can print, I think, config list maybe? Yes. Kind of print my Get identity here that I've previously set up. And setting up your Get identity, it's not difficult, but it may require you to open up the terminal and maybe operate a little bit outside of some of our comfort zones. But it can be done, and it's not that onerous. So you want to get in there and set up your profile using that software, and then once you do, the next step is linking your Get and your RStudio account. So we've downloaded and we've installed Get. So the next thing we want to do is set up a GitHub account. So GitHub is just a cloud-based repository for hosting like Get projects. So let's do this GitHub piece first, and then we'll walk through the piece of linking Get with RStudio. So the GitHub piece is reasonably self-explanatory. If we were just to go out to GitHub, right? Just sign up for GitHub here, and then go ahead and create your account. So you need a username and a password and all that other good stuff. And once you've set that up, then we can move on to this piece here, which is kind of the real critical piece for, at least for the benefit that I'm talking about, being able to interact with other people's GitHub repositories and pull down code that's always the most current version of code. So linking Get with RStudio. Again, I'll show you the resources here that kind of walk through this step by step, and I'll give you a brief peek at what it looks like in my environment. But since I've already done these things And let's see, I think chapter 12 is where Jenny Bryant talks about connecting RStudio to Git and GitHub. So let me just go into RStudio very quickly and just show you that in the Tools menu and the Global Options menu, in RStudio and the Global Options, there is, in the left nav rail here, there's a Get SVN option, right? And so once you've downloaded the Get software, right, you want to know where the Get executable is, because that's how you're going to link your RStudio version to your Get software. And that's how you'll be able to push and pull projects to and from GitHub, is just by telling RStudio where to find the Git executable that you've got. Now, once you have your RStudio version linked with your Git account, then that's where kind of the fun stuff can start happening. So I'm going to go through two examples here. The first is going to be setting up a repository for my own work in GitHub, and then cloning that repository in RStudio. And I'll talk through kind of why that's fun and beneficial. And then I'll walk through another quick example of cloning a repository that belongs to somebody else. And so that will be a nice illustration of something that you might do with collaborators, where someone else sets up a project, and then you're pulling from that project and running a local version of it in your RStudio version. So where we're going to start is back here in GitHub, and if I'm in my GitHub account, right, I can just use the new icon, or use this drop down to create a new repository, right? And if I create a new repository, sure, I'll use their suggestion, urban octo potato. And then create this repository. Again, I'll get this URL. And so if I copy this URL over to RStudio and do a new project from version control from Get, and I paste that URL in, I'll create this project. And I'll just kind of show you how the basic stuff happens here. So I've got the project. If I toggle over to GitHub, right, I've got this project. It's been provisioned. There's not really anything happening in it yet. Okay, and I'll go over to RStudio, and I will add a README. So I'll add a new file, R Markdown, README. Create this file. I'll make it a markdown document. And when I knit this document, it's going to crank out a markdown file. Okay, and so up here in RStudio, remember from a few steps ago, I've linked my RStudio with my Git version by letting it know where the Git executable is. So if I go up here, I have some options that are available to me, and so one of the first things that I need to do in the Git workflow is that I need to commit this change, because I had this empty project, then I created this README file, I added some text to this README file. Okay, and so I want to commit this change. When I commit it, have the option of adding some comments, new repository. Okay, so I'll commit those changes, and then once I've committed those changes, I can then push those changes. And when I push those changes, they're going to propagate up to the GitHub repository for the project. And we can see that those changes have been pushed up to the GitHub repository by refreshing the project, and now my project has one file in it. It has a README markdown file, right? So just to give you a flavor of kind of how this works, right? So now I'm over here in RStudio. I'm developing this R project. You know, maybe I add a script, and you know, maybe I add some data files here. All these changes that I make. So actually, let me do that. So I'm going to go over here in my file browser, and I'm going to find the local version of this project that I have, Urban Octo Potato. I'm going to go new folder, and I'm going to create a data directory. So that's a place, and you guys will probably by now be familiar with this kind of layout. This is a directory inside the project where I might drop some CSV files that I'll be working on. And so, again, I've made a change, created a data directory in here. I haven't put anything in it yet, so I can't push anything up to the repository yet. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back a level. In this familiar data import, I've got at least one CSV file that I can borrow from. So let's do that. Let's borrow this CSV file. So I'll copy this over. Put it in this data directory. And once I've done that, then I have something that can be pushed to the GitHub repository. So I'll come in here, stage, I'll check this file here, which is the file that I want to add. I'll commit it to the repository. Okay, new data file, commit it, and then after I've committed it, so committing this change is a get operation. So it's gonna commit that to the project, and then pushing it is gonna push those changes up to a GitHub host. So push. It's probably worth commenting on this operation of pushing data files up to GitHub, because there are some storage limits, and it's a real pain if you try to push something to GitHub that's too big for GitHub. It's not a cloud-based repository that was designed. It's designed to hold software and code. It's not designed to hold really big data files. So I don't know exactly what that storage limit is off the top of my head, but if you try to push something that exceeds the storage limits, you're going to break your project. Like, I've done it before, and it's a serious pain, and there's a lot of comment boards talking about how to troubleshoot such things, but usually I have to just like delete the entire project and start over. So be careful about pushing things that are too big, and maybe even just Google like what are the storage limits so that you know, because I can't tell you off the top of my head. But since I did push those changes, if I refresh the project now, I have a data folder, and in that data folder that's kind of nice. Now, this last thing I want to show you guys is on the topic of cloning a repository. And this is kind of back where we started. I'm going to show you kind of what it looks like when you're cloning a repository that belongs to a collaborator. And so where I'm going to start here is to take a look at this website that many of you have probably seen, which holds a lot of the materials that we created for this workshop. And this is a website that Emily Markowitz created, and it's quite incredible. And this website lives inside of a GitHub repository. So this GitHub repository contains all the code and dependencies to run this site. And what I've done with Emily's permission is that I've cloned this repository using that familiar method from earlier in this video. And I've gone over to RStudio and I've created a local version of this project. So I've cloned this repository in RStudio. This R Workshop for Social Scientists. I have it running in a local version. And what's nice about this is that Emily has put together a lot of content that is way, way over my head. It's beyond my skill set. And it's nice for me to be able to kind of poke around inside the bowels of this website and how this website is laid out and organized to kind of learn a little bit more about how you can run a website on GitHub pages using R Markdowns. And so one of the things that I do with this content is that I use this pull method here. And so this, when I go into the project, I'm not making a lot of changes in the source code here and pushing changes, although I could if I had a better understanding of how this works and I was more confident that my changes were not going to break something that Emily has worked really hard to set up. I could make some changes and I could commit those changes and I could push those changes back up to the repository. But mostly what I've been doing inside of this particular project is just pulling, and so Git is just telling me at this point that I'm up to date because before I started working in here earlier, I did a Git pull, and that ensures that when Emily is making changes to the source code, that I'm always getting the most current version of the website. I'm always getting the most current version of the code. I'm always getting the newest, coolest, freshest stuff by using this git pull method to kind of refresh my local project so that it stays connected to the repository and is always bringing in any changes that Emily is pushing up to the version. So I wanted to highlight this for you guys because I think that if you can kind of navigate that workflow of getting Git configured and getting a GitHub account set up, cloning these repositories that I've set up, this data import and export and these other repositories that I've set up for the course, it'll be a nice kind of elegant way for you to get a local version of these projects. So all the code will kind of run on your local version of R, and then when I'm making changes, because I find periodically I find typos or people are pinging me with certain things that I thought I tested, but maybe I didn't test quite well enough and they didn't work on somebody's version, so I have to make some changes to things. Then, I'll have this project open and I'll do a git push and push some changes up to the repository. And if you've cloned these repositories and you're back over here in RStudio and you want to work in those repositories and you just do a git pull, you'll get the refreshed version of that code. So that's all I have on the topic of Git, GitHub, and RStudio. I know that wasn't really the deepest dive, but hopefully it's presented enough material, enough resources, and has given you at least a wide enough discussion of what's happening to kind of implement some of these steps on your own and get working in GitHub, because it's it's a really nice piece of software and a really nice place to host your R code